services that new construction is requiring as far as services within the county. This is a more modest amount of positions than we started with, so if the public were to go back and look at the links of all of those requested budgets, I think that there's maybe been some commentary in the public. There were more positions that were requested, and I want to respect the fact that on the agenda, I think the commissioners will kind of handle maybe discussion about that aspect, that there were more positions requested that did not make it to the final round. So there's kind of like cuts throughout the process, and this is where the final new positions are at. One of the concerns that I have, state sales tax revenue, as you can see, this is a significant part of, I don't know how many got this single sheet. The single sheet is essentially kind of an overall summary, but this is also summarizing our revenues. And you'll see the budget on the left column, and then the second column is revenue from sources other than property tax. That means fees. You know, I see Director Minshaw here with Development Services. That department, for example, receives a lot of fees from building permits, et cetera. There's all kinds of other revenues, but also sales tax revenue, interest. All of those revenues are allocated to each budget under that other revenue line. And then to the right of that is the property tax dollars levied that is helping fund that budget, right? That's to the left. And then that fourth column, budgetary use of fund balance, is the amount of fund balance that is needed in order to fully fund the budget and ensure, I have to ensure as the clerk that we present a budget that, you know, no checks bounce, that we can fully fund this budget if the commissioners were to approve this budget. And apart from budgetary amendments or whatnot, this budget can be fully funded by what's in fund balance. But sales tax revenue, as you can see, is a big chunk because the total other revenue that we receive in the county, aside from ARPA, and I know ARPA and landfill, those are kind of at the bottom because those are sort of outliers. ARPA's not forever. ARPA's money that comes from the federal government that we already have in our possession. It has an expiration date to be spent by, but that shows up as 28.5 as revenue. It also shows up as 28.5 expense. It just nets out. You have to show it as revenue and then expense. It's net neutral. But really that total Canyon County operating funds, other revenues, a little shy of 46 million. We've budgeted 18.3 million to come from sales tax, and we're being really modest with that. So I'm only highlighting sales tax as the other revenues because it's the biggest piece of the pie from the other revenue. And as you can see, from 19, really from 18 to 19 to 20 to 21 to 22, really 20, 21, 22, the county saw $1 million increase, a $3 million increase, a $2 million increase, but in 23, there's a $500,000 increase, and we're on pace right now in the middle of 24, actually 3 quarters through, to be, we think we're gonna be about even to what we saw in 23. In other words, sales tax revenue from the state has flattened, and we're budgeting for next year for it to be flat. And if it is flat, that would be 3 years in a row of it being flat. It would be the 3 smallest growth years in the history, I think, of sales tax growth in the state of Idaho, at least as I see on record, for 3 consecutive years. When the county was seeing 1, 3, 2 million more than they received from the prior year, that's a significant chunk of money that the county was able to realize. I think it was partly what motivated the county to try to keep the property tax levy lower in some of those years because sales tax was coming in excess of expectations, whereas now we're pretty flat. And so that is kind of a bad news, and that is a concern that I have. And related to the new positions, I do want to reiterate, I've asked that those positions be delayed and not hired until ideally February, maybe with a minor exception or 2, but generally to hold off because I would like to see 2 quarters. We would like to see 2 quarters of sales tax revenue to make sure that we're not going off a cliff. If that were the case, I would strongly recommend to the commissioners that you might have to hold off on some of the positions, but in order to have the authorization to hire the positions, you need to approve a budget that has those positions in it. It's easier to hold off and not hire the positions, but have the budgetary authority, but look at the revenue trends. I know this is a lot of information. I'm not going to detail this completely, but I think what's a little confusing in our publication, I think it's important to note, it's just we're following the statute. I got 3 minutes left. The 22 actual and the 23 actual, that's, just so you know, the actual is not what was budgeted, okay? The budget was higher. The county usually spends, you know, it's fluctuated 81% of the budget one year in 21. That was really an outlier because that was a COVID year. But on average, the county spends about 88 to 90% of its total budget, okay? And most of that's driven by turnover, vacancies, usually not hiring someone the day after someone leaves. When you have those gaps in employment, the county is not expending its full budget. So the actuals, 22, 23 are actuals. The 24 budget is the fiscal year that we're currently in, and that increase from 23 to 24, a lot of that is because the 24 is the budget, the 23 is the actuals, which is, again, a percentage, maybe 90% of what the actual budget was. So we're not giving 24 actuals yet because we're not complete with the fiscal year 24. Once we're complete with fiscal year 24, we're happy to provide that data in the next quarterly budget report. But I think the importance of this slide, to the extent that you can see it, is I was trying to neutralize ARPA because ARPA was causing a lot of confusion. And when I met with citizens, and one of which is here, we grabbed a bite to eat, Mr. Burton here, you know, once there's more clarification on ARPA, I think it was helpful for members of the public to understand how the total budget was reflecting the ARPA expenditure. It was, I think, May of 21 when the then commissioners chose to receive the ARPA money. The ARPA money was received from the feds, taken into our possession with an expiration date to spend. When you spend that money from the feds, it has to show up in the budget. You're just not cutting checks out of a separate account that doesn't go through the budgetary process. So you'll notice, and really starting in fiscal year 22 was the first year, because that was the fiscal year following the receipt of the ARPA money, the county put into the budget the possibility of spending ARPA money to the tune of $6.8 million. And when you look at the total budget in 22 of 119 and you roll out the 6.8, the 112 is a more accurate picture of what the budget is minus the ARPA. ARPA mostly is being used to fund extraordinary capital needs, not necessarily non-reoccurring expenses. However, the county has used ARPA on some reoccurring items. For example, the lease on Pod 6 and the jail has been a $1.4 million cost. We've used ARPA a couple years to fund that lease payment, and there's other things that ARPA has spent. 23, 24, and 25, the reason those numbers go up is the placeholder. It has to be in the budget in order to expend the money, and the money has to be committed at the end of this calendar year, and it has to be fully out the door by the end of 2026. So the 38 million, for example, that's in the ARPA fund for FY24, we're not going to spend 38 million. So what that's going to do to the budget is you're not going to see 38 million as revenue, you're not going to see the 38 million as expense. You're going to see a smaller part of that. 25 is rolling over what is in our ARPA fund balance so that you have the authorization to spend that. I hope that helps clarify a little bit how ARPA affects the total budgetary picture. When you roll ARPA out, net of ARPA, that line, you see the budget has actually been pretty stable for 3 years in a row. Some of that is due to other moving pieces, and I know I'm over time. He hasn't shocked me. But part of why the budget, for example, the payroll budget this year over last year is going down by a couple $1 million, almost $3 million, is public defense, which has been funded through the county budget, is they're becoming state employees on 10-1. That's an important transition. And because they're becoming state employees on 10-1, we no longer have to fund public defense in our budget. So that is partly why some of our salaries and benefits budget is going down. Property tax projections, we want to be really careful with this. This is your gross property tax bill, and I'm leaning on Steve Onifray. We're doing worst case scenario, essentially, on assuming the fully loaded budget based on the average values. We can fairly accurately predict what the tax charge would be year over year. What we're seeing in that far right column, year over year change, is a very, very, very modest decrease, by -1%, essentially flat to -1%. That's even with the average home going up slightly. The taxes are still going down because the levy rate is going down in this budget. Part of that is because the new construction addition, which is about 1.9 million of our tax base, is being funded by new construction, which is an important distinction to make. When the property tax budget goes up, part of that is because the tax base grew. More people are paying taxes, and when new people pay their tax bill, we collect those taxes and get to add it into our budget authority. So part of the levied authority is driven by new construction. In the current fiscal year, the county chose to use 3% foregone, which was a one-time use of foregone, plus 1% foregone, which was ongoing. But that 3% foregone rolls off, does not get to be retaxed again this year, and it's almost the equivalent of what the net increase is, which is why you're seeing a pretty flat year-over-year tax implication. That being said, we've talked internally, the numbers from the state, because you got the homeowners tax credit for the first time this year. We don't think they're gonna have as much money to apply this year, but that's a state program, not us, okay? So there's a formula that the state uses to apply to the tax bill, and that's where it gets really confusing. But I know Treasurer Lloyd and the website is very helpful, because when you go to your tax bill and you can punch in your address, you can see what your gross tax bill is and what the amount of the credit was that applied, and then to see what your net tax bill is. It's really important to see what that credit is that applies. That's the state helping pay for part of your property taxes through the credit as it's applied. But the gross tax bill, that's essentially what we control to the extent that the budget and the assessed value is driving what your tax bill is. So that covers really the kind of the talking points as far as just the highlights. I know there's so much to potentially cover. I do have, I could have a robotic voice and just read numbers, but there's no need. This is published in front of you. There's many divisions within the county, and I thank all the county employees for being faithful stewards of the finances. This is a highlight here of what was published in the paper, but I did add I added a column showing what the difference was in column G, and it just kind of shows what budgets went up, what budgets went down. These budgets do include on the A budget those new positions that are spread out to the relevant departments, some salary adjustments for certain employees for market adjustments, and a 1.5 to a 2.5% COLA depending on an employee class. So that is built into the budget as well. But essentially this all rolls down to a net budgetary impact of 9.2 million less year over year. A lot of that is the ARPA reduction and also public defense, which also rolled out this year over last year. So I know I'm over by 10 minutes, over the 15. And you did start just 5 minutes over the 5. But hopefully, I know I went really quick, and hopefully that answers maybe some questions to help maybe expedite, the public interaction, engagement, testimony. But Chairman, we stand ready for any questions that you might have.
Sure.
Otherwise, yeah, back to you.
Okay. Thank you, Clerk, very much. As you can readily discern, he's a man of a lot of information, and he has a team that supports him completely and backs that up with facts. So in compliance with Idaho Code, and we have met and exceeded most of these, in sections 31.1604, 31.1605, and 31.1605A, the Board of Canyon County Commissioners are meeting here tonight for the budget hearing. So also pursuant to Idaho Code 63.802.1E, the board intends to recover $591,748 of available foregone in its fiscal year 2025 property tax levy for ongoing maintenance and operations pursuant to Idaho Code 63-802.1F. The Board of Commissioners of Kane County has elected to levy less than the maximum allowable increase for property tax and intends to reserve the right to recover in subsequent years. $13,769 of foregone for Canyon County Pest Control and $712 of foregone for Melba Gopher. A public hearing is what we're going to do next, and on recovering the foregone, you're welcome to talk about recovering of the foregone for Canyon County and reserving foregone for Canyon County Pest Control and Melba Gopher. And we will hold that in conjunction with the county's annual budget hearing. So what I'm going to ask for is that you can talk about foregone, you can talk about Melba Gopher, and you can talk about Canyon County Pest Control, and you can talk about any of the items that are within the Canyon County budget. If you would keep your comments and discussion, if you could try to limit that to them, and as the chair, I will help us keep on task. So is it okay with the board if I open up for public testimony?
Yes, Chairman.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
may I suggest a 3-minute time limit on testimony?
Thank you. I said that earlier with the ambulance board. Yes, 3-minute time limit would be, we will have, Monica will be over there and she will notify us in some manner that'll get our attention, so, all right. So with that, I'm going to open the hearing for public testimony on the budget and those other items that I mentioned. And Monica, you have a list there?
I have a list of about 13 names.
Okay, let's just take them in the order they're signed up.
Jeff and Diane, looks like Peter, H-U-T-E-R.
No, we're not. I think we signed the wrong form.
Okay,
The next name is Cindy Foster.
No, thank you.
okay.
Ida Garlow. Jody Arnold.
I would like to commend the commissioners for their process and thank the clerk. I went to a lot of the budget workshops, and the process was really great and open and transparent, and I would like to thank you.
Thank you.
And Chairman, I just want to say thank you to Jody Arnold. She was instrumental in assisting with
The elections process. She wrote and passed a bill at the state legislature and has been very supportive of the board in getting information that's been requested or assisting. That's greatly appreciated. Thank you for noticing that we are trying to live by what we've adopted, which is transparency, respect, the ability to unify, provide service, and the last one, whatever that is. There.
And I'd like to publicly thank Jody. You know, when we started this out, we might have been a little bit adversarial because we didn't really understand each other. But you have been so constructive in your concern to the board. We're a better board because of your input. Thank you.
Yes, yeah, and it is teamwork, Chairman, so, and it's the citizens, the elected officials, it's the people we serve.
Yeah.
That's a win.
Yeah, it's a win. Okay?
Kiara Peterson.
I was asked to sign in.
Okay.
Steve Burton.
Okay.
Commissioners, first of all, thanks for addressing that email and some of the after workshop meeting issues that I brought up. First of all, I just think you guys did a great job keeping the budget flat. Basically, it's going to be the same budget as this year. So that took a lot of hard work and effort. I really appreciate all that you guys did. I'm guessing that our fiscal year '24 expenses are going to come in a little under, which is going to help increase the fund balance. And that's kind of where my primary concern was, is how the fund balance was coming out. You're increasing the sheriff's office budget, which I fully support. They need more people, and I think that's great. I really support you in that endeavor. So it looks like the fund balance, if you take out the enterprise funds and ARPA funds, so at the end of fiscal year '24, it looks like it's gonna come in about 48%. And then, and that's much better than what we thought. We thought it was gonna be a lot lower, kind of dangerously low, that we were going into this year. But that's looking good. And then, so this year, you're looking at taking out 14 million of the reserve funds. Again, I fully support applying that to fiscal year '25. And that amount of money only takes you down to about 36%, which is a good, healthy number. And so I think you guys are on the right track. You know, it's good analysis, and that was well done. And at the time, I didn't know until the clerk just posted what the proposed property tax rate's going to be coming up, but that's going down. And I think that's really important that the people understand that we kind of peaked there, and now we're back on a more sustaining budget. Now, the only concern I have, and maybe you can address, is that the fund balance for the landfill fund, is 17 million, went up to 19 million. And this budget looks at, it's going to go all the way up to 20.5 million. Now, it was stated by the COO that the landfill needs to keep a reserve in case they have to close it of $10 million. Well, it seems like we're getting a bigger number all the time. So my question is, can the board influence the directors of the landfill and try to reduce their fees so that the homeowners, or basically the taxpayers in the county, can see some relief there? Seems like we keep building up the reserve there unnecessarily. And but the only way I think you can give us relief there is to try and get the directors to lower their fees. And then, like I said,
That's time.
okay. So again, thank you for all your hard work. Appreciate the effort.
Thank you, Steve.
Just for the record, I wanted to comment that
Kent County has some of the lowest tipping fees nationally, and the reserve that's there is intentional. I'm not sure that the last time that fees were looked at, the board did approve a fee adjustment in the landfill structure, but it had been 20 years since doing that, and they are, if you're following that at all, doing a land gas system. Yeah, and so there's a flare station out there it's a federally driven requirement that they install that. So there are costs associated with that, and he's a great manager of that. I would still submit that we are in line and still some of the lowest fees in the nation.
Any comment?
No, Mr. Chairman. Thanks, Steve.
Steve, I appreciate your comment. Maybe we need to have lunch. It's a very, very large enterprise, and it currently, we think it has a 70-year life, but we're gonna have to put in millions and millions of dollars to do that. And so you also have to save up money for future land acquisition. And currently, there is no parcel that's identified for future. So it's not your normal operation that you just keep $10 million. $10 million is a lot of money, but that's a ginormous operation. And the fees are frustrating because if we lower those fees, it's difficult legally to have a different fee for different people. You just have a fee, and we